Hey everyone, welcome to the room. Now I'm going to be doing one of my bottom shelf vinyl voyages today. While we wait for things like big news on John Lennon Mind Games, other Beatles related news, that kind of thing, we're going to finish off the bottom shelf vinyl voyage series. Not today, there's more episodes to come, but let's just have a sit down. I've got a nice comfy cushion because sometimes people have concerns about my back and the comfiness of where I sit. I've got a nice comfy cushion, so let's get set up and talk you through some vinyl. So I've got a few more pieces of vinyl here as we make our way into the final section of this 4-piece vinyl shelf. So first of all, for this episode, I've got 4 albums here by the same band. These are one of my favourite current bands. I mentioned the Lemon Twigs in my last video, who are my favourite current band. I would say these are second favourite. This is Public Service Broadcasting, a British band. They make really interesting music. This was their first full album, and it really sort of fits the remit of the name of the band, Public Service Broadcasting. These are all songs where it takes audio from old public information films and turn them into songs, and it works really well. It's quite hard to describe, especially when I get to some of the further albums, but this was their first album, and it's got old public information articles on things like the Royal Mail and warning against speeding and things like that. There was one about Everest on here. It's very interesting. If you've not checked out Public Service Broadcasting, I would really recommend that you have a listen to some of their stuff. Maybe that first album, maybe some of these that I'm about to show you. This was the second album, The Race for Space. This was the album that really got me into the band. The concept of this album is basically the race for space between Russia and the USSR as it was then, and America back in the late 50s, right through the 60s and into the early 70s. This takes actual audio from things like John F. Kennedy's speech about putting a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Lots of actual NASA footage of the moon landings and the first sort of attempted moon orbits and such like, and again sets it to really great music and makes it into a really interesting story. This was one of my favourite albums of the last decade, and one that I really love, and these do sound great on vinyl as well. I got to know them on CD first, but they do their vinyl really well to Public Service Broadcasting. Always really elevates the album. And then there was the third album, Every Valley, with the unusual topic of the Welsh mining industry. Certainly the only album I've got on that topic, but very interesting. It features a speech at the start by Richard Burton. It's got a male Welsh male voice choir at the end. You can see them doing their bit at the end there. James Dean Bradfield from the Manic Street Preachers guest vocals on here as well. And it really is the story of the rise of that industry up to its peak, and then the decline of it. You've got songs here that use audio from the point of view of the wives of the miners, and just tells a really interesting story set to great music. I saw them live when they were promoting that album, and they're a great live band as well. The last album of theirs that I have is this one called Bright Magic that came out about 3 years ago, I think. Yeah, 2021. And the theme of this one is sort of the rise of Berlin culturally through the 20th century. So you've got, I must admit it's a topic that I know virtually nothing about. But it's very interesting listening to this way. It sort of deals with what was happening in Berlin decades and decades ago, and it goes through, and you've got things that are, of course, sort of David Bowie, Berlin era sounding kind of tracks. And you've also got some songs like People Let's Dance, which are really sort of contemporary, modern, I don't know if dance music's the phrase, but it's that kind of thing. Maybe think Daft Punk. It's got that kind of a sound to it. They have made another album since this about which was done to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the BBC, and it's kind of a potted history of how the BBC started. That's interesting, but I haven't got that on vinyl. So moving on, we're into the letter Q now. Oh, I wonder if there's been a big band beginning with the letter Q. Of course there has. Queen Greatest Hits. What on earth can you say about this album? that hasn't been said millions of times before. This vinyl record is split over 2 discs, and it's a great gatefold. Let me just show you this. That's a lovely gatefold. I don't know whether, did the original vinyl of Greatest Hits back in the very early 80s have this? I don't know, because this is a recent reissue. Let me know if you know. But is this the greatest hits album of all time? It's got to be, hasn't it? I discovered this album first of all back in about, I think it was late 1986. Very much with the encouragement of my mum, who regarded Bohemian Rhapsody as one of her favourite songs, I think. And it's just absolutely fantastic start to finish. Even though I guess you would think of can there be a lesser known Queen song that's on Queen Greatest Hits? But if there was, things like Now I'm Here, maybe Good Old Fashioned Loverboy, Play the Game, still utterly brilliant. And that closing duo of We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions, just those 2 songs were just born to go next to each other, weren't they? They certainly fit beautifully together, but I don't like to think of greatest hits albums as classics in their own right, but that's absolutely one of them, and there are very few others that I would put in that bracket, but I think that's the best of the lot, to be honest. I've got one other Queen album on vinyl, and it's the one from the movie that came out a few years ago, the Bohemian Rhapsody movie starring Rami Malek, who, I mean, he was fantastic as Freddie Mercury, wasn't he? And the main reason that I got this was because it's not got all of it, but it's got a fair chunk of Queen's Live Aid set that you can hopefully just see there. So it hasn't got Crazy Little Thing Called Love or We Will Rock You from the Live Aid set, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. Crazy Little Thing Called Love wasn't the highlight of that set, but things like Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio Gaga, Hammer to Fall, I think they were my 3 favourites from the Live Aid set, and they're all there. Other than that, I probably don't have a great interest in this album because I would rather listen to the original stuff. I mean, that is original Queen. It's not re-recordings or anything, and there's some good, interesting things on there. Live versions, for example, that have not been released before. But for me, it was the Live Aid stuff was the reason why I got that. That's all I've got for the letter Q. Moving on to R. Wow, Radiohead, The Bends. Now I have a thing with this album. That if you're going to think of that phrase of a perfect album, an album that when you just couldn't improve it in any way, this is probably the only album I've ever heard that I would fit into that category. There is nothing I could do to improve this album. There's not like a bit of a song that I wish wasn't there, or there's not a song I wish wasn't there. It's just perfect from start to finish. This was my introduction to Radiohead, was this album. I'm not really fussed about Pablo Honey that came before it. But this just all the way through is just utter brilliance. When there was still very much a sort of, they weren't really experimenting or pushing the boundaries like they would go on to do. It was just straightforward guitar rock pretty much, but just done absolutely brilliantly. And yeah, that is a perfect album to me. Absolutely love it. But the weird thing is, the next album, OK Computer, I wouldn't describe this as perfect, but I would describe it as a better album. Now, when you're thinking of an album as a piece from start to finish that fits, this is their masterpiece of an album. Even though I think The Bends is absolutely perfect, but that's a perfect collection of songs. This is a fantastic album. It's got a special place in my heart as well as this album. If I could just share a personal story with you. Back in 1998, on a Sunday night, I listened to this album while I was playing on my old Super Nintendo and listening to this album at the same time. And as the album finished, I heard a shout from upstairs from my missus, and it was bang, we're off into hospital, and I was a dad the next day. So this was the last album I ever heard before I became a dad. So it'll always I'll always have that memory of that Sunday night there. This was the reissue from 2017 called OK Not OK that's got another disc of things like B-sides and other songs from the sessions, which I've never really massively got into. But when I played this album on vinyl, compared to me only ever having it on CD, it was just sensational. The sound of this album is fantastic. And no surprises on here. Just absolutely blew me away, the sound quality of it. I mean, I personally don't think that in the, 27 years since, since OK Computer came out, I don't think there's been a better album. Certainly not that I know of, anyway. I think it's the best album there's ever been from that point onwards. Absolutely fantastic. We've then got Kid A, which was, this was the next album, wasn't it? And they're getting into the very kind of experimental phase here. And I think it's Moments of Genius and other stuff that's probably a bit above my head and tends to lose me a bit. But the opening track, Everything in Its Right Place, is beautiful, sounds great, really love that, and the effects on it. The national anthem is just an absolute trip. It's not the national anthem, it's not our national anthem or anybody else's national anthem. That's the name of the song, but it's an absolute jazzy trip. Really good. And Tree Fingers is one of the most sort of chilled out songs you're ever going to hear, I think. This is a gatefold as well. Okay, but it's not the most exciting gatefold you're ever going to see. Not as good as that Queen one from before. But I think Radiohead, when they're good, my goodness, they are pretty special as a band. I've got one more from Radiohead before we move on. In Rainbows from about 2008, 2007 it was, in fact. I really loved this album. I played this so much when it first came out. I got it on CD when it first came out, and I only just got this probably 3 or 4 years ago, maybe. But there's just some fantastic stuff on here. 15-step, Body Snatchers, Weird Fishers, it's House of Cards. It's a very, very interesting album that I think shows them off at their absolute peak. And I think this probably, in terms of their absolute sort of mind-blowing best, I think this was probably the end of that. It was part of it, but I think probably after that, they've not grabbed me so much. Maybe the song Burn the Witch. But other than that, I've not been too fussed since In Rainbows. We then move on to Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood, Sugar, Sex, Magic from 1991. I believe I'm right in saying that this album came out on the very same day as Nirvana's Nevermind. Wow, what a day that was. I mean, that's on a par with, depending on what you read and which country you're talking about, I think that Blonde on Blonde, Dylan's Blonde on Blonde and Beach Boys' Pet Sounds probably came out on the same day as well. But Nirvana's Nevermind and this on the same day, that's up there for me. I just sort of ignored Chili Peppers for decades, really. And it was probably about just over 10 years ago that I started to get to know this album, and I've listened to them an awful lot since. I wouldn't say I've become a super fan or anything, but I do really enjoy cranking this out loud. You've got the classic on here, Under the Bridge. You've also got Give It Away on here, are the two sort of big well-known ones, but it's just fantastic, funky rock all the way through. And in terms of personnel, musicianship, all right, what Anthony Kiedis does vocally is great. He's never going to be one of the world's great singers or anything like that, but people will either love it or hate what he does, and there's a lot of people hate what he does. But if you look musically at John Frusciante on guitar, Flea on bass, and Chad Smith on drums, I think that's just about as good a sort of rhythm and bass section as there's been. I think it's up there with Led Zeppelin and Queen and whatever. Just absolutely superb musicians. And that's their masterpiece for me, is that. But then a couple of years ago, they brought out 2 double albums in the same year, Unlimited Love, which of the 2, I'll show them both at the same time while we're here. There was Return of the Dream Canteen and Unlimited Love. I would say Unlimited Love is probably my favourite. This is a limited edition blue vinyl. Let's just get it out and remind myself how blue it is. It's been a little while since I've played it. It's a nice looking piece of vinyl. But it's got a fair sort of range of styles on here. They've got more sort of gentler songs on here than just the all-out funk that they would have been doing early on in the career. But then you've got something like Poster Child, really funky, but it really reminds me of, and I'm going to forget the name of this song now, but the Beatles fans amongst you, there's a bootleg audio of Paul McCartney from 1968 during the White Album sessions, and he's with Donovan, and he does this real sort of little folky tune. I can't remember the name of it. That it's very sort of wordy and it flows sort of really quickly. But it really reminds me of or Poster Child on here really reminds me of that Paul McCartney song. And I'm going to try and find out the name of that and put that there. But anyway, yeah, Unlimited Love is great. Return of the Dream Canteen is, I think it's not as great a collection of songs as Unlimited Love, but it's still got some really good stuff on. But I think I could get to know this album a lot better than I do at the moment, which is what this vinyl voyage is all about. As I've said, I want to play these things again, make sure nothing gets missed, and just learn to know these albums better than I do. Some of them I know really well. Some of them I'm going to be playing them for, I won't have played them many times at all ever. I tend to sort of file solo artists alongside the band that they're best known for. So John Frusciante from the Chili Peppers brought out a solo album called, I think it's the Empyrean, I think is how you pronounce it, Empyrean. This was a 10th anniversary reissue back in, so I think 2009 was when the album came out. 10 years later there was a fully analogue reissue of it, and this is really interesting because he is a stunning guitarist. He really is, and this shows off a lot of his greatness. There's some songs on here. There's one called sort of Dark Light, one called Central on here that are just epic, really. And it's a really interesting listen and a really great sounding album as well. We've got 2 albums left for this episode of the Bottom Shelf Vinyl Voyage. The first one is from 1991, was it? Tell me if I'm wrong. It doesn't actually have the year on the back, so I'm going from memory. R.E.M, Out of Time. This album was my sort of proper introduction to R.E.M. I bought it on CD back in the day. I think back in 1992 I bought it, so not as soon as it came out. But I'd bought it because of Losing My Religion, Shiny Happy People. I know that the band really dislike Shiny Happy People. A lot of the public dislike it. I think it's a fantastic song. And I am always going to love listening to it. But Radio Song, I think, is it's a bit cheesy. It's very, very early 90s. I think it's almost sort of bordering on Hootie and the Blowfish. But it stays just the right side of it. But Losing My Religion, absolute classic. Near Wild Heaven, I see on here, which I was surprised to hear on the radio a few days ago. I don't think I've ever heard that song on the radio before. But as well, you've got, there's some songs on the second side, Belong, Half a World Away, Country Feedback, Me and Honey. Just great songs, and one of my favourite R.E.M. albums. The follow-up, Automatic for the People, I haven't got on vinyl. I really want to get it, but it's one of those where I want to buy it once and do it properly. So I'm still not sure which is the version that I need to go for, whether it's a recent reissue, an original pressing, or one in between. So I'm sort of on the lookout because I do love that album and I would love to have a great vinyl copy of it. But the other R.E.M. album that I've got on vinyl is New Adventures in Hi-Fi, which was from the mid-90s and really interesting album. It really sort of draws you in, does this. It's much more laid back. It's got How the West Was Won and Where It Got Us to start it off with. Ebo the Letter that Patti Smith appears on here, which is another great song. And there's a few great songs all the way through this. I think this was very much one of those albums that was sort of made during a big world tour at various points through it. So in that vein, it very much reminds me of Zooropa by U2 that came out maybe a couple of years or so before this. I think U2 and R.E.M. in those early to mid-90s were really sort of battling it out for biggest and best band in the world status. But that is also the time when I went to see R.E.M. So I've got, although they were promoting the Monster album that came out before this, but they were, unbeknownst to us, they were making this album at the same time. Where's that sticker? The sticker's just gone. That's fallen out. Yeah, this was the 25th anniversary edition. It's quite hard to see that. It's not too. It's a bit faint, but yeah, 180 gram 25th anniversary edition. I would really, really recommend, if you get a chance to have a listen to this. This edition on vinyl sounds absolutely superb. And I am on to the last of these 4 compartments of this shelf now in this series. I'm not quite sure whether this is I think this might be about the 5th video in this series. I've probably got 2 more episodes to do. So we're up to R.E.M. alphabetically. We're going to go to the end of the alphabet. And then I've got a section at the end that's a bit more, well, I'm not going to say what genre it is, but it's all, I've got about half of this section over here is all albums of a particular genre that I have very, very rarely talked about publicly. So I'm looking forward to having a chat about that at some point. So let me know what you think about these albums. There's some links here to previous episodes of the Bottom Shelf Final Voyage if you've not seen any of them before, or if you want to see them again. Thank you very much for watching. See ya.